Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is an award-winning journalist who spent 28 years as the editor of two small-town community newspapers in Massachusetts. She met her future husband, Conley, in California, where she was teaching English and has always been fascinated by his story. She and Conley were married in Los Angeles and were featured on the Newlywed Game with Bob Eubanks. After their first appearance, the popular couple was asked back for the Alumni Game. They came in last both times. Their incompatibility has lasted for 50 years. Boy at the Crossroads is her first novel. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Mary Ford.
Thank you so much for having me. I welcome the opportunity to visit with you today.
Thank you, Mary. Our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, so what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I was a newspaper editor, which is incredibly time consuming. So it was more a matter of time than it was desire. I always had it in my mind to write the quote, great American novel along with millions of other people. But being able to find the time when I was working 40 to 60 hours a week in a career and a job that I loved, and I miss it to this day. So I'm happy that it took me this long, actually, because when you leave a career like mine, it's like falling off a cliff. So suddenly it's, what do I do now? I don't have any more deadlines, demands, phone calls, meetings, interviews, production days. So being able to sit down and tackle something that had been rattling in my head for years kind of saved me. So I'm happy that I published my first book at the ripe age of 72. I didn't say old age, the ripe age of 72. And in part of my ability to do it was that being fascinated by my husband's story. He's the 15th of 16 children, grew up in East Tennessee, in the Appalachia region near Knoxville, and ran away at the age of 13 and ended up hitchhiking all through the South. And on his first exploit, he sold hot dogs in New Orleans. So he was only 13 years old. So I had this story in my head. So over the years, when he would go home to East Tennessee from Massachusetts, where we live now, I had him bring a tape recorder, and it had the little mini cassettes, and just put it on the passenger seat and just talk into it on these long drives. I didn't always go with him because of my job. It was one of those jobs where if you took a week off, when you came back, it was pure hell. So he recorded. So when I retired at the end of 2018, I had about 30 tapes to sit down and go through, and I had to find the batteries and the little recorder because they don't make them anymore for the little mini cassettes. So that was able to give me kind of the color that I needed to get started on the book. So I was happy to be able to dive into it.
Well, I think we're all trying to figure out retirement, Mary, and they say that we baby boomers are never going to stop work. So I think that's why a lot of us are writing into our retirement years, because we want that job. We want to be sitting at a desk and actually accomplishing something every day.
And it's interesting because writing and being in the newspaper business is a very tangible job occupation. It's not like real estate, for example, and I love realtors, but you can work with a client for a year and then they can walk into another office and buy a house with someone else. So you have nothing. You don't actually have something you can hold in your hands. And that's the appeal, I think, of writing. And whatever it is, articles, books, short stories, it's a wonderful habit, I guess, wonderful occupation.
Yes. And I think, I love to see things in print, and you got to see a newspaper in print, and that was your scorecard. It's kind of like a coach on the football field. You get to see that scorecard every single day.
It is. You get to hold it in your hands and say, I did that. And I was actually, my papers were weeklies. So we had a week to kind of put them together. But back when I started in the late 80s, if someone had told me I was going to be putting out, it would be 104 papers a year for all those years, I would have run down the street screaming. So I don't know how I did it looking back, but I did very much enjoy it.
Well, we have to hear more about this Newlywed Game. Tell us, because most of us remember that show.
Yes.
Why do you think you and your husband knew so little about each other?
Well, part of it is that my husband is a ham. So he just loved the camera. So what happens in Los Angeles, at least back then, we were married in Los Angeles. I had gone out after college to be a teacher, and he had been transferred out from Alabama. And we met in the same apartment complex. We dated for about 7 months, which back then seemed like a long time, and got married. So we got a postcard in the mail saying, hey, why don't you try out for the Newlywed Game? So we kind of joked about it and said, well, why not? So when we tried out, we drove, I think it was to Burbank, and there were probably 60 couples that were trying out that same night. And they put you in groups of 4 couples on a mock show where you sat in front of producers who didn't laugh, didn't smile. So when it was our turn, the answers that Conley gave were bizarre. There was nothing I could match. He was just having fun with it. So afterwards, I was kind of depressed, and I thought, there's just no way we're going to be on this show. But they did take us into a separate room from the other couples. So that was the only hint. And sure enough, about 2 weeks later, we got the call from a producer congratulating us that we had been picked for the Newlywed Game. So when we were on, we were very nervous. Back in those days, a lot of TVs were still black and white. So you were instructed to wear dark colors, not a plaid, anything like that, or you'd be replaced by an alternate. So when we got on the show, Conley and Bob Eubanks got along great, but nothing that he said would have connected to anything I could think of. So he just had the time of his life. I was kind of the straight man, and he was the ham, but it was tons of fun. And we ended up after 2 tries. So after the first game, we got a call about a month later asking us to be back for the Alumni Game. So they asked the most incompatible, but the popular couples back. And so after 2 games, and people, it was amazing how many people saw us on this show. Everyone watched the same programs back then. We ended up with all of these consolation prizes. So I got a carton of Princess Gardner wallets that were avocado with pink flowers. I probably had 30 of them, a set of avocado cookware. Avocado was big. It matched our avocado shag carpet. And he got 14 pairs of polyester pants in a variety of colors that took all the hair off his legs. They could stand up on their own in the closet. That's early polyester for you. So that was our claim to early fame.
Mary, that is hilarious. I can just see all of that. That is so funny. Well, back to the more serious topic. Once when you knew you had to write the book, how did you proceed?
Well, first of all, I had those tapes and I sat down and transcribed them. And it was kind of drudgery because they were all over the place. There were vignettes here and there. There wasn't a chronological order to it, but it provided the foundation for a lot of color, a lot of colloquialisms, little things that he did. He had an amazing memory for detail. So I transcribed all of those. And then I realized that I needed to learn how to be an author. Now, I've been a writer, I've been a reporter and editor for many years, but I didn't start that way. I started as an English teacher. And after we were transferred a bunch of times with my husband's job, and I was a substitute teacher in many states with certificates in Missouri and Minnesota and Illinois, being a substitute at the secondary level is not a good job, at least for me. The kids go in with the sole purpose of ruining your day. So I finally said, after we were in Illinois for a while, that I wanted to do something different. And so I went down, I saw an ad in the Daily Herald for correspondence, and that was a daily newspaper in the northwest suburbs of Illinois, still exists to this day. And I applied for a correspondent, which was a stringer, part-time, and they send you out for stories. And the first time I walked into a newsroom, it was the most amazing feeling. I felt like I was home. I fit. And the reason is that they are incredibly messy. They are dusty and papers are stacked from floor to ceilings. You can hardly see the reporters over the stacks. And there are 5 in my family, 3 sisters, and I am the messy one. So I felt very much at home, like I can work here in this organized chaos. And the people, we just seem to connect. And I learned quickly, if you were dependable and could get the job done, they were going to use you a lot. So I was a runner back then. They gave me a running column. I did all kinds of stories, and I just loved it. So I learned, though, from editors who took me aside that that's not the way to do it. That's not the way we write. And I learned how to write in the journalistic way. And journalism is more informational. It's concise and informational. So when I started on my journey as an author, I signed up for some courses at a center in Boston called Grub Street. It's a creative writing center. And I also took meetups, and meetups are all over the country, and they for anything from basket weaving to writing. So I signed up for a writing meetup. Run by a wonderful young man who had published a book. And there were about 22 of us in the group. It was pre-COVID. And we were allowed to submit a chapter, and he would critique it, and the whole group would critique it. And he said, Mary, you have to learn to leave the newswoman behind. And that was the best advice I got, because I was writing it like a report. And no one wants to read a 250, 60-page report. So I had to learn how to craft it differently. And once I caught on to that, it was very freeing. And I started stabbing away at just chronology. It's a very chronological story. There are a lot of flashbacks, but it moves along. So that provided a good kind of track for me to follow. And it also is such an interesting story. So one of my instructors at Grove Street said, well, wouldn't it be nice if all of us had a story like that? Because his story and where he came from is just so different and so unique and kind of nostalgic. It's a time where kids got away with stuff that today they probably wouldn't. And today they wouldn't even be outside; they'd be on their phones. So,
how did Conley? What did he think about your writing his story?
Well, he encouraged me all along, and he loves the attention. He has loved it. I was a little concerned that it wasn't necessarily going to be popular with some of his relatives, but they've all been very supportive, which was wonderful. Now, he is, remember, at the younger end of 16 children. So most of his siblings have passed away. So that right now he and 2 others are all that are still living. But he's been my biggest supporter. He just loves telling a story and sharing it. And it's an important story because it tells the story of a boy who made some bad decisions, but still turned his life around. And all of those decisions were his own, which is very different than today, where everyone is asking everyone else, and kids can't seem to make their own minds up. So it has gotten some wonderful reviews that reflect that. So I've been very, very pleased with the book and the results and the reception.
Well, after you wrote your first draft for the book, did you search for an agent or decide to use a hybrid, or did you self-publish this book?
Well, so what happened was I had taken a course again. I took 3 or 4 Grub Street courses, and during the course of that experience, the instructors also, you can also hire them to read your manuscripts, which I did. And I again, I'm a learner, so I took whatever they said to me to heart and made changes. And so I was took one of the courses was how to get ready for an agent. And so it was very involved with spreadsheets and all this other stuff. But I just thought, after really reflecting on it, that it could take years. And I have 2 friends that published traditionally. And one of them, her publishing company delayed her publication for a year after she went through everything. And the other gal isn't allowed to even write a press release. It all has to come through the publisher. And I don't think that their books are doing better than mine necessarily. So I was on Facebook, as we all know, if you like something like dogs, you suddenly get all kinds of information about every kind of dog organization under the sun. So I was starting to get writer information. And one was from a company called Paper Raven Books, which is based in Denver. And they were offering a boot camp that went on for 3 days for $99. So it was all day Friday, Saturday, and Sunday remotely. And they are one of the companies, there's a lot of them right now, that assist you in self-publishing. So I took the boot camp and I was very impressed, especially with Morgan, who's the CEO. And then she has a one-on-one call with you and goes through the entire process. And what I needed help with wasn't with the editing or the developmental editing of the book. I had done that in spades because I had been through all kinds of what we call beta readers, alpha readers, if you think of Grub Street, meetups that I had revised and revised. So what I needed help with was just, how do you do this? And how do you design the cover? How do you design the inside of the book? And most importantly, how do you launch the book? And that's where Paper Raven is wonderful, because they have that down. So when I talked to Morgan, I think it was the beginning of November in it would have been 2020. She gave me a month, and in a month I went one more revision, and they took it and they proofed it, and then they designed, which I didn't realize, when you do a fiction book, it should be cream colored pages, not white. And so there are all these little things. And then they conduct a cover contest, which was tons of fun. So we had like 215 submissions for the cover, and we narrowed it down, and it was perfect. The cover is one of my favorite parts of the whole book. And so then they do a launch, and that's where they understand the metadata and the algorithms on Amazon, which is the biggest game in town, and how to get your book recognized, or how people can search for it. So when you launch, you're guaranteed of getting a #1 rating in at least 3 categories. So I went through that process, which was basically self-publishing.
But you had a partner, and that always helps.
Exactly.
I like having a partner in this industry because it is so complex and so humbling.
Yes, and that's a really good way to put it. It's not necessarily for everyone, but for me, being a newcomer, it was really perfect.
Well, why don't you set up the passage that you're going to read us from the book today? Let us know about it, and then read a few paragraphs.
I'll read a few paragraphs. Let me just see here. Where am I? Okay, this is just, this doesn't require much of a setup. That's why I picked it. So it's a little tiny flashback. And Conley, who was known as Connie by his family, is kind of reflecting when he sees this firefly, and he's actually sleeping in an orange grove in Florida after he was away now from home on his 3rd day. So a firefly, he sees one, and then he reflects back. Around dusk, there was nothing quite like chasing after a lightning bug and grabbing it in my hand. It was amazing to see 50 bugs all light up at the same time in a mason jar. But the sad thing was, the next morning, all their lights were burned out. I remember late one summer night waking up in a sweat with my heart pounding and picking up the mason jar from beside my bed. The dead bugs were piled up in near total darkness, with the exception of a single lonely lightning bug that was still trying to glow. For some reason, I was overcome with a desire to save it. So I jumped out of bed in the basement sleeping area that I shared with my brothers Joe and David, my bare feet slipping on the dirt floor. I charged up the steps and out the front door onto the porch, where I opened the lid to the jar to let the lightning bug out. With freedom soon at hand, the tiny insect didn't seem to know what to do. It hesitated on the rim of the jar, turned and gave me a look, and then flew off into the night, with its light glowing brighter as it picked up speed. I now felt like that lonely lightning bug, not sure where I was headed or why, but on my way nevertheless.
That's beautiful, Mary. That's
Oh, thank
very
you.
nostalgic for those of us who trapped those lightning bugs in our childhood.
There's a lot of nostalgia in the story.
Do you have a second novel in you?
I do. It's kind of an interesting story. So we were transferred from Illinois to Massachusetts, where I actually grew up. And this was back in 1987. So my husband decided that we would look in my hometown, because he knew once I was back here, I'd be driving to Scituate every day to see my mom and to reconnect. And I really was thrilled for the opportunity for my sons to be able to connect with their grandparents and with some of their aunts and uncles and cousins, having moved around so much. We were always so far away from everybody that we grew up with. So before one of the first days I arrived, I called the local newspaper and I got hired as a stringer, a correspondent part-time. So I had a little extra time and I thought, I've always wanted to write a novel. So I sat down and I drafted one. It's a love story and it takes place in Scituate and it's based on a true event, but everything else is fictionalized. And I whipped kind of through it. I didn't really know what I was doing. And I had a friend that worked at the newspaper that I really respected take a look at it. And he just basically said, it's a good start, but it's really not ready for prime time. And then I got hired full time. So I just put it up in the attic. So once I finished Boy at the Crossroads, and I've been working hard on the marketing aspect, I needed another project. So lo and behold, I went up to the attic and I found it. Now it was written so long ago that there's perforations along the side of the paper because it came out on that old-fashioned computer paper. So I'm just having a wonderful time rewriting it. After all my years in journalism now, I'm a much better writer than I was back in 1987, 88. So I'm working on that and it's coming right along. And I'm going to take a Grub Street novel course in July, which will be online, not even Zoom. They actually go live one day a week and then you can take the course any day during that week. And I'm in a couple of meetups and I'm getting good feedback. So I'm having fun doing that. But the story that means so much to me is my book, Boy at the Crossroads, and getting that out there and into the hands of readers. So I've donated copies to libraries in Knoxville, Tennessee. So it's in 7 libraries there. It's in all my local libraries. And I gave a talk at Scituate High School, which is my alma mater. Just recently, I've given a bunch of library talks and talks at senior centers and things like that. So I'm having a lot of fun going out on what people call my book tour, even though I haven't left town, so to speak. But it's been a lot of fun. I've been enjoying it.
Well, other than your book tour, what else are you doing for marketing?
Well, I took a course, again, I'm a learner. So I signed up for the Amazon Ad School, which is different than Paper Raven. And once you're a member of the ad school, and it's not part of Amazon, it's a separate company. It's run by a man named Brian Cohen. You're a member for life. So I've taken a couple of courses through that, and they're all on video. It's very complicated. It's a lot of detail and doing Amazon ads. You can do them very cheaply, and it takes a lot of practice. So I've been launching Amazon ads, and I'm on BookBub, and I've been entering contests, And recently, I had a wonderful review from the Historical Fiction Company, and I got their 5-star highly recommended reading award.
Oh,
So I
nice.
was thrilled about that. And every time I give a little presentation and talk, and people either buy my book or I give books away, I have a little a bookmark that explains how to leave a review, because reviews are really important, especially on Amazon, because it gets you a little bit higher on their hierarchy list.
Yes, and that's a whole new ball game for us to figure out.
It is. It's complex, and math was not my strong suit. That's why I went into journalism. So it is complicated, but it's challenging, and it's something that keeps me busy. And I'm very focused on this new chapter in my life.
Well, do you leave time to read for pleasure? And if so, what genres?
Well, when I started going with my story, initially I thought I was writing a memoir. So then I was corrected at Grub Street that it was actually a novel, because the memoir would have to have been about me. So learning that I was writing a novel freed me up tremendously, because I could invent and enhance some scenes and dialogue, etc. So during that process, I read a ton of memoirs. I read The Liars Club by Mary Karr, The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. I read Educated by Tara Westover. So I went through a whole ton. I even read it's a memoir about Patty Boyd. I think it's called Wonderful Tonight, and she was George Harrison's first wife. And I love that book. So I read a lot of those. At the moment, I do like nonfiction. So Malcolm Gladwell is one of my favorite authors, and I'm reading a book right now called Clues, which is not by him. The author's name escapes me at the moment, but it's about the clues that you send off by your body language, and how, if you're giving a talk or a presentation, where you should sit, how you should fold your arms, cross your legs, etc., even what your eyebrows should do. So I'm having a lot of fun, because I'm using that in my quote unquote book tour.
Nice. We all need to read that, because our bodies do give out clues, and we sometimes don't want them to give out those types of clues.
And even just the arm folding, you can put someone off. There's open stances and closed stances. It's very interesting.
That is very interesting. Well, Mary, our writers over 50 are so unique. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
Well, the best advice I can give you, because I worked with so many writers over the years in my career, and when I was hiring reporters or correspondents or talking to columnists, one of my favorite questions for them was always, are you a writer first or a reporter first? And 9 times out of 10, they said they were a writer first. And that was actually the wrong answer. It was easier for me to teach someone how to write than it was to report. Now, most people applying for journalism jobs have a basic writing ability. So it wasn't like I was starting with none. But my best advice would be to remember that writing is more of a craft than an art. So what does that actually mean? Yes, there are some writers that their flowery prose is wonderful and they're famous and they're wonderful, but 99% got to where they are by just a lot of hard work, a lot of revision, a lot of listening to critiques and rewriting. And the second most important thing, besides just getting down to it and working hard and realizing you can do this, you can write. I hate it when people say, I'm not a writer. They just haven't written, is the story. Remember the story. And as a news person, one of my gifts over the years was news judgment. I was able to recognize a good story out of nothing. I have reporters come back and they'd say nothing happened. And I'd say, well, that's impossible. And I could pick out something and we could make a story out of it. So remember, the story is really important. No matter how wonderful a writer you are and how beautiful your prose is, if the story is dull, boring, and very complex, people are not going to read it. End of story right there. So my advice is get busy, Just keep trying, take courses if you can, join meetups, and listen to the critiques. I've been in so many groups where people are so sensitive and they jump right in and say, oh, no, I can't do this, I can't do that. The other important thing that I learned at a meetup from the same young man that told me to leave the newswoman behind, it's called killing your darlings. And that basically means when you've written something and you absolutely love it, but it doesn't fit, it doesn't move the story forward, it has to go. Now, as an editor, my floor is covered with vignettes in Conley's life that did not make it to the final cut. I cut easily. It was like my job to cut things. So you have to remember, don't be so possessive over something. If it doesn't fit in the story, if it doesn't move it along, take it out.
Well, Mary, I can tell that you were an excellent editor and now you're a wonderful author, and we're all going to have to dive in and read that fascinating story about Conley. I bet he is a character, and we all want to hear more about his story. So thank you so much, Mary, for being with us, and we're just so excited that you're now one of our authors over 50.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.